to tell me. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Community Together. And we are in week 6 of Stay in Place. And I'm very excited today to have two good friends and colleagues to talk with us about a very important topic. We have Don Lanson with Manfredi, Levine, Eccles, Miller, and Lanson.
Oh, nice.
And we have Janice Miller with Miller Haga. And we are two very prominent attorneys here in the Conejo Valley, and we're going to talk about some important items as it's April 21st. And we're coming to the end of the first month and May 1st being around the corner. And we know there's a lot of landlord-tenant potential issues that are going to be coming up on May 1st. And so I've invited you on to, first of all, welcome and thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Lydia, for having me. Greatly appreciate being here to be of service to anybody. Our firm does both landlord and tenant work. Today, I'm going to talk about tenant issues. Don is going to talk about landlord issues, but some basics. If anybody is having issues with their landlord, the ability to pay because of the COVID-19 problem, recommendations are really have transparency and speak to your tenant, speak to your landlord, both on a residential and commercial side.
And I deal a lot with landlord and tenant as well. Landlord issues are very frustrated right now because obviously there's a lot of benefits out there for tenants that we'll get into. There's a lot of benefits for businesses to the extent they can apply for various loans and programs. Not really anything specifically out there to help landlords unless they're able to work something out with their banks. So there's a lot of frustration with regard to the leases and what they can do.
So let me start by saying, from a tenant perspective, every lease is different, whether it's on the commercial side or the tenant side. You should really read your lease in concert with your landlord and come up with a solution, because the landlords are hurting as well, as Don just referenced. So there are a couple of different ways that, as a tenant that can't pay or doesn't want to pay, that you can do in finding a solution. One is potentially asking for pure rent relief and abatement, meaning not paying at all. Another potential is asking for a rent deferral, which is to take the rent and pay at a different period of time after potentially the COVID-19 issue is done and over. Another way is, if there's tenant allowance that's coming to you from a commercial side, maybe ask for an acceleration of that money now, or ask the landlord to hold on to that instead of paying that so that you can assist the landlord. Don, do you have a couple of suggestions?
Those are all great pieces of advice. And from a landlord perspective, I don't like any of it. Because at the end of the day, I'm basically having to be victimized by this process for a tenant that can go get a loan and go get help and go get $1,200 and go get PPP and go get this and this. And meanwhile, I am being asked to then not get any rent, not get any of my triple net expenses or whatever it happens to be for a period of time. And the difficulty is there's no idea how long this is going to be. So a lot of landlords stick their heads in the sand and say, you know what, I'm just going to do nothing. I'm going to tell the tenant, and technically speaking, this is correct. The rent is still owed. You know, whether or not all of these other things we'll get to in a bit as to help. The rent's still owed. It doesn't go away, and that's your job, and that's what your responsibility is to pay it. I think personally that's not a good idea. As Janice said, there's a lot of good things that can come from actually working together and actually coming up with a solution. You can even actually do a document, an agreement, that actually details exactly what the parties will do, whether it's a deferral or an abatement or whatever happens to be. Because some of the difficult things, by the way, that happen is landlords get very upset, and even if they do give rid abatement, they may give a 1099 for debt forgiveness, thinking that there's some financial benefit to them if doing it, but they don't tell the tenant what's going on. So all of a sudden the tenant gets basically income by virtue of having that rent abatement. So all these things that landlords could do, not a great idea without necessarily talking to your tenant, because at the end of the day, that tenant is your lifeblood, and this is going to get better at some point. And then what relationship do you have with the tenant going forward?
Great point, Don. One thing that I'll mention too is on both the residential and the commercial side, the CAR, California Association of Realtors, has come up with a form that deal with COVID-19 issues, and that you can use that form in this particular instance. If you don't want to use that particular form, you can use your own documentation, but whatever you do, please get it in writing so that you'll have that memorialized, whatever the deal or transaction is. Now, Don talked about something which is, if you don't pay rent, you are absolutely in default of your lease, okay? That doesn't mean, though, that the landlord can evict you at this point in time. There's both a state order as well as a City of Thousand Oaks order, which says no evictions for a period of time. Right now, it's May 30th, I believe. Yes,
Yeah.
Don? May 30th, May 31st, somewhere in there, unless it's extended. So while the landlord may put you in default and may say that he's going to exercise all of their rights and remedies under the lease, they still cannot start unlawful detainer proceedings, and they can't evict you during this period of time.
Are the courts even open to evict?
So that's the good point. And again, from what Janice was sitting there pointing out, one of the difficulties is that cities, counties, states, whatever, all started issuing various different orders trying to help the parties work out a deal. And the problem is it left enough of an area that people thought they could get in between the issues. One city, one county may issue something and saying moratoriums as to this issue, or for instance, one area would say only as to failure to pay rent. Another would say it's everything, including even a no-fault issue. For instance, if a lease is up, or if you want to actually take it off the market and tear it down and build something else. So at some point, there was a realization by the court system that, you know what, this is too vague and too problematic, and there's too many lawyers that are trying to find ways to get through this. The Judicial Council, which controls every single court in the state, came out about, it was 3 weeks ago, and said, look, all of that stuff is fine, but we're going to issue an order that says for 90 days after the state of emergency is lifted from the governor, you can't file any eviction proceeding, commercial, residential, doesn't matter. We're not even going to issue summons. We're not going to process your complaint. We're not going to evict anybody. The sheriff isn't going to actually go out and kick anybody out. There are no evictions, commercial, residential, for 90 days after that state of emergency is lifted, which right now could be 4 to 6 months from now. So there really is nothing going to happen, again, from the Judicial Council standpoint. What I'm seeing, though, is a lot of landlords are still trying to find ways around that by saying, you know what, the law says, though, that you have to prove to me you can't pay because of COVID-19. And because of that, I want all your financial statements, all your records, your profit and loss, your tax returns, and everything else to prove that this is related to that. If not, I'm going to move forward.
And to add to Don's point, one thing, in whatever documentation a landlord is going to give you, read the fine print to make sure that they're not requiring that you give up what Don mentioned before, the $1,200 that you're potentially getting from the government, or any unemployment money. Some of the landlords may take that as an opportunity to seize on that money. They may also ask that you personally guarantee from a commercial perspective. The leases now, which they didn't do before, they may ask for financial documents on a revolving basis until the period of time that you're not paying is resolved. So again, as I started our discussion, transparency with your landlord, open up a dialogue sooner or later. We represent a lot of commercial buildings, a lot of commercial tenants, and they're getting notices from their landlords saying, yes, there's a force majeure, but it's not relieving you of your obligations to pay. You're in default. And if you're in default, we're giving you the opportunity to cure because of COVID-19, but we're reserving all of our rights. So after that 90-day stay potentially is lifted, then we might file a default or try to evict you.
Hey, Lydia, have you ever heard of the term force majeure before, about a month ago?
No, not. Now it's part of our everyday language, but yes, a month ago, nobody knew of it.
Right.
It's funny because it's, a Latin phrase that all of us learn in law school is this kind of very bizarre thing that only happens in a law school exam.
Not anymore, Don.
No, yeah, everybody's learning Latin and coming up with it. And again, I get it, a lot of real estate transactions, Lydia, I'm sure you're seeing it in terms of a lot of transactions. Lenders are all of a sudden changing their minds as to approval, saying, oh, well, circumstances change. And then buyers and sellers are trying to say, well, force majeure or impossibility or whatever. And a lot of that problematic issue is, going to be used, and it's going to be litigated, because all of this has a requirement of good faith that you're asserting it based upon an actual basis that is reasonable. And like I said before, a lot of landlords are pushing the issue, saying, prove to me that you're actually not able to get funds. So I have one right now where a company, a tenant, sells everything on the internet. They're doing better. They actually sell medical equipment. They're doing better now than they were before, yet they're saying we have financial impossibility because of the virus. So the landlord's saying, I want all their records. I want you to push the issue. I want to go after them because they're lying and they're basically making me a victim of an opportunity they're trying to seize.
Well, and you really haven't touched on what this is doing to the landlord and their responsibility to the banks. Because what we're talking about is tenant landlord agreements and contracts. But now you've got the landlord who has an agreement with a bank or, their building. And
Correct.
that's a whole nother factor that.
Yeah, what happens is it switches places. I mean, things go uphill and the landlord in this case shifts and becomes the tenant, with the bank being their landlord in essence, or their mortgage holder. And the banks are saying, well, we need our money. And the landlords are saying, well, the tenants aren't paying us, so we can't pay you. And that's why it's a trickle-down theory. And the banks need to have open communications with their landlords and the tenants, and then they have to have open communications as well. There's a bunch of legal different arguments that Donna and I can both discuss. But to keep it on this level, best thing to do is to talk to whomever it is, whether it's a landlord, a bank, any third party, about the issues that you're having, and try to come to a negotiation that works for some of you. I think you might have seen in the paper the Cheesecake Factory, with hundreds of thousands of stores, has basically said, we're not paying anybody, come sue us. Right? We represent another restaurant chain, and they said, we're not paying anybody, and they're getting a lot of letters saying, sorry guys, you're in default, you have to pay. Some of them are saying pay a portion. Don mentioned from a commercial perspective, triple net lease, where you have operating expenses. So the landlord's saying, okay, I understand my rent, but I still have electric, I still have utilities, I still have taxes and insurance that have to be paid. How about you pay me a portion of that rent? So each deal is different. Approach your landlord, put it in writing, and best of luck to everybody.
So one thing about the landlord you said is, and again, it trickles all the way through the process. So a landlord has a loan with a bank. That bank made the loan initially and then probably got it guaranteed by a federal agency, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or whatever. To maintain that guarantee, they have to keep getting payments. So if they don't get the payment, they lose that guarantee. So they have to actually push the issue of foreclosure with that landlord if they're not getting the payment. So it kind of all does I jokingly say it's a wonderful life thing, because it's all interrelated in terms of where the funds are and where it goes. And every side is being victimized. There's nobody that actually is the hero here, so to speak. Everybody's dealing with it. The problem being is that trying to negotiate with your lender obviously can be difficult. Meanwhile, most of the big lenders out there are dealing with PPP and not giving money to small businesses and what's going on there. So they're a little occupied. I've heard some banks actually have given a 3-month moratorium on mortgage payments. Again, if you can demonstrate your inability to pay is by virtue of the virus. So it's all kind of an interrelated, mess, so to speak.
Well, and I think what Janice had said initially, and you had said initially, it's all going to start from open and honest communication. And I think everyone is really trying to figure out how to work together to make it work. And the more people can be transparent, and we always know there's going to be those that aren't going to be transparent and are going to want to take advantage of things. And, let's hope that that's a minimal level. But we do know in the Conejo Valley, we have a lot of people in trouble. We have a lot of people who have been unemployed. We have a lot of small businesses that are definitely in trouble. And I think your information and knowledge are certainly, you're dealing with this every day. They're being communicated. I know that both commercial and residential have brought out forms that you basically have to, sign. Both landlord and tenants have to sign and agree. And maybe they're using a portion of their PPP. Maybe they're using a portion of their unemployment. Maybe they're able to pay something, or maybe they delay it. But I think there's a form and an agreement, just like when they initially went into a lease, that agreement comes together. And then it's up to the landlord then to go to the banks, and the banks are obviously wanting to keep them in place and not evict them either, right? There's a 90-day, most banks are putting a 90-day moratorium on foreclosures or hitting their credit today, because I know a lot of tenants are worried about their credit and not wanting to ruin their credits. And I know there's a lot of, on both sides.
But here's one important thing, and again, it comes back to what Janice said. I mean, right now I get a lot of landlords that say, hey, can I report them their credit thing? No, you can't. You can't evict even if they have, and this is residential, but you can't evict them even if they potentially have the virus. You can't even ask if they have the virus because it's an ADA issue. So what can you do? And the problem is you can't evict, you can't report them to the credit, you can't, I mean, all those things that landlord can't do. But what you can do is try to find a win-win. Go to your tenant and say, hey, I understand you're having this, let's abate or defer. By the way, maybe you'll extend for a year, or how about you do this, or and I'll give you some tenant improvements, or some other basis to actually improve the relationship. Because again, we're going to get through this at some point. But then what do you have? Right now, my concern, and I think both of you shared as well, is what's the marketplace going to look like 6 months from now when all these businesses can't go back in, say, to malls or whatever it happens to be?
Right. That's an excellent point. One of the things that we're recommending a lot is to look what the win-win is, and potentially it is we're uncertain where the world's going to be in the next 3 months, but maybe 6 months from now things will start looking a little more normal, and extensions of leases is a great potential win-win for both the landlord and the tenant in both the residential and commercial side.
I wanted to bring up one other issue.
Commissioner of Thousand Oaks, Don, you sit on as a commissioner of Thousand Oaks. What are you guys talking about as far as commercial, and what's going to happen to the malls, and what's going to happen to a lot of small businesses? Is that on the plate to what it's going to look like potentially 6 months from now?
Well, the city of Thousand Oaks was already undertaking a general plan update to deal with a lot of the change in how business structure is. There was a plan in place 50 years ago that was great for that time period, but we're trying to update it. And then this happened, which changed the entire kind of structure and concept as to exactly where we're going and what we're doing. They're still putting that together. The city tried to pass and did pass an ordinance preventing all commercial evictions, because that technically was not provided for by the state law. So they stopped all of that to basically give a breather period of time. So they're trying to work with businesses and find things that work. The difficulty is there's so many businesses right now that are being told to basically just tread water. Like for instance, the mall, the Oaks Mall right now is closed. And every tenant in there has not been alleviated of the obligation to pay the rent. I don't know what the Oaks Mall is going to look like, and that may change the overall business idea of exactly where the mall goes from year to year. Whether or not it makes sense. So there's trying to find ways to help businesses. Now, with that said, our area is getting more involved in biotech companies that are moving into the area. We're diversifying a little bit in terms of exactly the types of businesses that are coming in. But I think, and Lydia, you and I have said this before, I think it's always going to be a backbone of the small business, the restaurants, the service providers, that ultimately are really going to be the backbone. And where they come out on this is going to be very difficult to see a few months from now.
So, I mean, again, it's super important to get out there and support our small businesses and shop locally and keep Conejo Valley strong, because that's why we're here.
Right.
We all live and work here. I read an article that in April, almost 66% of the people did not pay their rent. So, you know, we got May around the corner and more unemployment than ever. And, you know, all really very good information that you guys shared today. And we're all hoping for everybody that we get back to some, I know Ventura County is trying to get a little bit back to some normality and open it up. And, you know, let's all stay healthy and safe. And, you know, that's the most important thing, because this is not an economic, it's turning into an economic crisis, but it started as a health crisis, right?
Right.
So both of you.
The business hasn't changed. In fact, everything that's kind of related to the business outlook has not changed. It was just the virus that changed that outlook.
And unfortunately, a lot of small businesses and a lot of, you know, people who are renting, whether on the residential or commercial, are affected. So there's no question. Very important to our community. Very important topic that you guys have shared. You're both, you know, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all your knowledge and information. And of course, you know, I don't know if they can reach out to you if anybody has any questions. I don't want to overwhelm you with phone calls.
It's totally fine.
Absolutely no problem. I already get that on the commission anyway, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Lydia, thank you for putting this together. This was
Yeah,
fun.
thanks for having us. It's been great information, and thank you for supporting the community. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you both. Stay healthy, stay safe, as they say. And go enjoy this beautiful day we're having.
Thanks, Lydia. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.